Hey guys, sorry in advance for the really janky setup of everything behind me. I want to start giving myself opportunities to just get my thoughts out there without the need to have super fancy editing and lighting and stuff. So yeah, let's just get into it. I don't remember when exactly this conversation was had, but when the new TBA roster was announced, there was a conversation around or rather, there was a conversation inspired by the new Young Gun pickup of Gats. If you're unaware, TBA is a new roster built by a couple of veteran talent, specifically Honey Badger, ex Dignitas, Vegas, ex Dodge, and then Balefrost, ex Oath, since that whole roster got dropped first. But they, along with those three, they brought in Gats, who up until this point has no tier 1 PUBG experience. From what I can tell, he has a fair bit of tier 2, tier 3 amateur event sort of experience, but he has yet to really be able to play in the events that I'm familiar with. You're looking at the NPLs from 2019, and then you're looking at all the PCS series, and of course the global events coming up from 2020 up until now. And the conversation that it struck was, and you see this all the time, of why do top teams only recycle old talent, and why don't we see new names like Gats brought up as often as you would think? I think there are a couple of different reasons for that. But first and foremost, I do think, and this is me without running the numbers in general, just from my observations of watching an unnecessary number of esports over the years, I don't think that PUBG is behind the curve in terms of bringing in new talent. So I think the better question is, why do we not see any sort of prodigy players like we had in ZWoo and CSGO, where they're an unknown name, they're brought in, and then they're almost immediately one of the best in the world? That, I think, is probably the more accurate question to ask. And I think it mainly comes down to experience in PUBG is worth more than it is in other titles. And that's not to say that experience isn't worthwhile in other titles. In fact, experience is one of the most valuable things, overlooked value things that a player can bring to a team. But in PUBG, I think it's even stronger. And I wanted to go over a couple of different reasons why that's the case. The first thing that needs to be stated is that in PUBG, competitive PUBG is one of the most indirect translations from the casual game. And I am lumping in ranked play, ranked ladder play when I say casual, just like the base game. You and I, we can just purchase a game or download it for free, depending on what game you're talking about. You can just immediately jump in and play ranked. I'm considering that as part of the casual experience in this sense, compared to the professional experience, competitive experience. PUBG has an even worse translation than even Counter-Strike. And we know Counter-Strike has a really, really rough translation compared to League of Legends. And if we want to take these three games as sort of a gradient, a graph, if you wanted to, League of Legends has a really, really direct translation, partly, or actually mostly, because the game is so set. You have your set roles. They have been established in the game themselves. When you queue up for ranked, even compared to Dota, where you just queue up and I don't actually know how it is, but I remember even when I did play a few years ago, you kind of just queued up and fought over the roles. And even in Dota compared to League, the roles are a little more amorphous. In League, you queue up specifically for what role that you want to be. You got top, you got mid, you got the 2 bottom lane roles, and then you have the jungle role. Like, already the game is sort of forcing you into those things. And so there's already that initial bench work for players to play in, that they already have that understanding with each other when they do make that transition to more competitive events, even if you're starting in the amateur field and then moving up and up the ladder, not the ranked ladder, but in terms of like the actual networking ladder to get noticed, and then eventually brought onto like an academy team and then a main team. In Counter-Strike, compared to League of Legends, it's really, really difficult, because even if you're looking at like top level FPL, the top level third-party ladder experience, where you have all the pros that when they're not practicing, if they're playing, oftentimes you'll see them playing in these matchmaking games. You got your ESCA, you got your Face It stuff. Of course, now looking at as of the date of this recorded, it's going to probably be merged, but that's a totally separate issue. It's still almost like 5 individual players who are kind of sort of trying to work together. yeah, you have people like, yeah, I'll throw a smoke for you, I'll throw a flash for you, but it's not nearly the same as the full protocols that a full team has. And so often pundits you'll hear in Counter-Strike talk about that sort of learning curve of you could be one of the best players in the world in terms of raw aim. You could be fragging out on these matchmaking games every night till 3 a.m. But the second you're brought onto a pro team, there are suddenly so many things that you need to learn, and it's very difficult. Even when you're brought up from like a tier 2 team to a tier 1 team in Counter-Strike, that learning curve can be incredibly difficult, and that's why it's so important to not only have individuals there to help train you, but also other individuals to help mitigate some of the issues that a new player might have. You never want to have a team in Counter-Strike of just like 5 raw new players, because then it's going to be absolutely crazy. That's why you need the players that are the veteran talent, even if they're more washed up, as it were. NBK is the name that immediately comes to mind, who, if I'm not mistaken, has been brought on to Mouse Sports, and he's had a long career in Counter-Strike. He used to be one of the best players in the world. I think he was playing in Source. I think it was Source, not 1.6. But he was a really amazing player back then. Recently, he hasn't been like a top star player, but his experience and his sort of, not leadership, because he's always struggled when he wanted to be the IGL, but his just like his foundational assets of support have always been incredibly valuable to uplift and help carry the raw firepower of like the more young guns, to give them the opportunities to frag out and win the games. In PUBG, so if you're looking at Counter-Strike to League of Legends has structure, Counter-Strike has significantly less structure. PUBG to Counter-Strike has even significantly less structure than that, partly because it's one big giant battlefield. There's no 2 spawn points that you sort of understand the basic line of scrimmage situation. 16 teams, the terrain changes every single game. And then more, I think an important thing to factor is that you don't have the freeze time in between rounds that you can sort of discuss things. In PUBG, so much of the game is being able to immediately make that call and just go with it and trust each other and know what your teammate is saying when they make a call. You need to have that shorthand. You need to have that chemistry. So much is based on just your gut reaction and reflexes, not in the sense of being able to shoot, though that's, of course, important too. Mechanical prowess is understood in this conversation. But the mental reactions, the mental muscle memory of your decision, the muscle memory of your decision making. There's probably a better way to describe that, but I know we sort of mocked teams for in the past when we've asked them, oh, who's the IGL, who's making the call, and they have statements that essentially go along the lines of like, oh, well, everyone calls. Like, that's kind of a silly thing to say. I do still think it's important in PUBG to have a hierarchy of decision making. You definitely want to have that one voice who's going to make that final call that everyone follows in case there is a little bit of a disagreement. And there probably are people who talk more in a team than others. Like, obviously, if you take TSM, for example, Pretty Curdy is incredibly, like, micro-focused on how he directs his troops. And then you look at Alo, who I have the impression, I haven't listened to their comms, but I have the impression that he just doesn't talk a lot. He just goes and kills, and he's very good at that. So you're definitely going to have people who talk more than other people. But even so, that information flowchart needs to happen almost immediately because of how immediate your reactions need to be. Not to mention the fact that chemistry is an important aspect of PUBG as well, because of how fast these calls need to be made. At the end of this discussion, this conversation about how important experience is in PUBG compared to other titles aside, if you think that we are just reusing the same old talent at the top of the pool, I would recommend that you go to Wikipedia, look at all the top teams that we have, and see just how many of them have been playing and for how long. Because if you look at TSM, yeah, this core roster has been together for quite a while and have been in the conversation for the top of North America for quite a while. But that's basically the only team they can really talk about it. When I think it's just the fact that Sonic's Oath and TSM have been so dominant, consistently dominant in the region for the entirety of the PCS era, that we kind of forget that these teams didn't, outside of TSM, didn't look anything like this from the NPL era, and God forbid didn't look anything like it before NPL, even TSM, SDK, whatever. Like the current TSM roster, that core looked totally different not even existing really before the NPL era. So we do actually have a lot of new people consistently coming into the game, consistently coming into the scene. It's just because of the nature of PUBG, it can take a little bit more time of training and practice and experience before we see them in the conversation for best team in the region, best player in the region.